Welcome back and thank you for staying with the broadcast. The government of St. Lucia, through the Ministry of Agriculture, has provided quick support to banana farmers amidst the current vulnerable COVID-19 environment. A check of $1 million was officially handed over to the National Fair Trade Organization this morning. Amanda Faye Clark reports.
The move, which comes as a response to a breach on the part of Windfresh to provide payments to farmers through the NFTO, is seen as timely as agriculture officials work to address concerns by farming and agriculture constituents in keeping their livelihoods buoyant and in securing local food sources. Chairman of the National Fair Trade Organization, the NFTO, Eustace Monroe, says he is elated by the Agriculture Ministry's assistance in settling outstanding payments to banana farmers which have been delayed for about 5 weeks.
I'm grateful and I have to demonstrate gratitude on behalf of the NFTO and the farming community, especially banana farmers, for this government response. Government understood the plight of farmers. Government understood where farmers were. They were not able to go over to supermarkets, at least to replenish the stock, when all others were able to have done that. So this gesture is something that is really, really appreciated, and we're indeed grateful for this government response, and government understood. And the minister, in his efforts, really attempted hard so that the farmers would have been able to get this benefit.
This is not the first time that the Agriculture Ministry has stepped in to prioritize the welfare of farmers, where Windfresh failed to meet its obligations to the NFTO and the local banana farming community. As Agriculture Minister Ezekiel Joseph explains, a restructuring of Windfresh is even more critical now as the industry faces additional unique challenges posed by COVID-19.
That advance payment is going to come from our COVID restructure plan for the government as far as giving support to agriculture, which of course include our banana farmers. So based on discussions with the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance and Cabinet, we agreed that we should approach the Invest St. Lucia, where Invest St. Lucia would advance the government $1 million in the first instance, so at least they would be able to have a very enjoyable Easter.
In the coming weeks, Minister Joseph vows to engage other Windward Island agriculture ministers to make good on its promise to the farming community to ensure the necessary adjustments are made within Windfresh to better serve the needs of the banana industry for which it was first commissioned. From the Ministry of Agriculture, this is Amanda Faye Clark reporting.
The government of St. Lucia has tackled the COVID-19 pandemic with measures of quarantine and isolation for persons who may be in contact with someone with the virus. More in this report from Fennell Neptune.
As St. Lucia continues to respond to the global pandemic of COVID-19, the Ministry of Health and Wellness stresses on the need to place individuals in quarantine and isolation to prevent the spread of the virus. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Sharon Belmar George outlined the difference between quarantine and isolation.
We use quarantine for persons who are well and who may have been exposed to a communicable disease. So these are people who feel well, they're asymptomatic, that's what we call it, with no signs and symptoms, and they may have been exposed. So we monitor them during that incubation period to see whether or not they develop signs and symptoms. But if they do develop signs and symptoms, you would then need to isolate them. And during isolation is for persons who are showing signs and symptoms, that is, they are sick. Many times isolation would be done in a hospital or healthcare type setting where they can get treatment as well. Isolation is even stricter because when you develop the signs and symptoms, it means that you have the capacity to spread it to other persons.
Dr. Belmar George also spoke on the procedures put in place for individuals in isolation, given that it requires stricter conditions.
From the beginning of isolation, we would have done the tests to see if you're negative or positive for the disease that you were exposed. So we would do the test and we would keep you within the facility. It would be a single room and we would give you the necessary treatment until after the isolation period of the disease. When you've recovered, we would then retest you, and until you get a negative test, we would then allow you to go home.
The Chief Medical Officer emphasized on the need for individuals to comply with the rules and regulations of the Quarantine Act.
The quarantine authority is the chief medical officer. So the chief medical officer has the powers to determine the location and the type and designate an area, a quarantine site. The chief medical officer also has the power to decide which persons or things become within isolation, within the quarantine facility, and also indicate who can enter or leave the quarantine facility. It also gives the police the power to arrest, even without a warrant, someone who does not comply with the rules and regulations of the quarantine facility, which is set by the quarantine officer, who's the chief medical officer.
The Ministry of Health and Wellness appeals to St. Lucians to continue adhering to the measures put in place to protect the nation from the virus. Reporting from the Ministry of Health and Wellness, I am Fennel Neptune.
Mayor of Castries, Peterson Francis, has showered high praise and given exceptional credit to the government of St. Lucia and the Ministry of Health and Wellness for undertaking the mammoth task of opening the Owen King European Union Hospital. The transition from the Victoria Hospital to OKEU Hospital was completed at the end of March 2020. Speaking to the move, Mayor Francis says this development will positively benefit the city of Castries and, by the extension, the whole of St. Lucia. He said he knows that the government had been working feverishly and putting structures in place to open the new facility, and that this is why, when the call was received to assist in the transition, he did not hesitate. Mayor Francis said the contributions of medical professionals are extraordinary, and as they work extremely hard with inadequate resources. By opening, he said the government of St. Lucia and the Ministry of Health complement that. He said, "We have endured some level of strain on our healthcare system. However, OKEU transition would reaffirm assurance in all. As a people, we should have full confidence, as I have, in our government to deliver." This is the Hot 7 Nightly News. When we come back, sports and the latest in weather.